So, good evening, everybody, and thank you for being here. I'm Tom Hogan, the director of the Milwaukie Poetry Series. So I want to welcome you here to the Letting Library for the poetry reading, which we've been looking forward to. I also want to welcome those of you that are seeing this on live stream. So thank you for logging in. And especially thank you because there's so many demands on our time. There's a lot of other things that we could be doing, but you're either being here at the library or logging in online for a poetry reading tonight. So I'm going to introduce our poet in just a few minutes that we've been waiting to hear for. But before I do that, I want to say some thanks. Thanks to the City of Milwaukie. The City of Milwaukie has, thank you very much. That is not particularly usual, and the City of Milwaukie has supported us from the beginning. We got a grant from the Clackamas County Arts Alliance 18 years ago, and so it was a startup grant, and as startup grants go, they were supportive right after that. So we're very thankful for them. Also thankful for the Letting Library here. We've been at the Letting Library the whole time. We've been at a couple of different facilities. Many of you remember that we were at the Pond House for a long time. We love the Pond House. But this is a beautiful library. So we're very thankful for the Letting Library. Thank you very much. And we want to extend thanks for the Milwaukie Poetry Series Committee. So a couple of people are sick tonight, so they are not here in person, but we think they are watching online. So thanks to the committee that works on this, because you need to have a board and you need to have people that are coming and are working and to make this happen. So a big thanks tonight for David Filer, who's back there. And when we get to the question and answer, David's going to bring the microphone around, so I'll probably say this again. When we get to the Q&A and you have your question, please speak into the mic, because we'd like to get the question as well as getting the answer. And finally, we want to thank the Willamette Falls Media Center. Our technician, our magician is what we call him, Josh back here, is the person that is making this all happen. So we really appreciate it. And we wouldn't be able to do this and do the setup without the backup of the Willamette Falls Media Center. They're also the ones that do the editing on our videos. So in the period of time, this reading is going to be up on the Letting Library YouTube channel for viewing. And to Josh, we thank him for that. A couple of things that are coming up. We have 2 events in November. On the first Wednesday of November is our fall reading. So there'll be an invitation out for that. There'll be 3 featured readers. It's on the first Wednesday of the month in November, and there'll be an open mic attached to that. After that, on the second week of November, the poet is going to be Jennifer Richter. So she will be here on, I believe it's the 13th. So, but it's the second Wednesday of November here, 6 o'clock. So you are all invited. And a couple of things I will mention too, there are some flyers here. We want to get the flyers out. So if you have a place that you would be willing to put up a flyer, please take it with you and do that. We'd like to get the word out. We do have some refreshments. They're back there. And we also have a broadside of one of Paulann's poems. If you don't have a copy, raise your hand and David will get you one. I think there's one right here. So, our poet this evening. There are so many things that I could say about Paulann. Grateful thanks to her for her help and support and consultation in the Milwaukie Poetry Series, really, right from the beginning. So thank you for that. Paulann is the Oregon Poet Laureate Emerita. And of all the things that we could say about her, let me say a few things. She's the Oregon Poet Laureate Emerita, has 8 full-length books of poetry, most recently My Kindred, from Salmon Poetry of Ireland. Her poems have appeared in many journals and anthologies, including Poetry, the Birmingham Review, Prairie Schooner, Orion, Catamaran, Wilderness Magazine, the Internet's Poets Daily, and Poetry in Motion, which put poems on Portland's, Oregon's buses and light rail cars. A great thing to do. A former Stegner Fellow at Stanford University. She's the recipient of a Holbrook Award from Oregon Literary Arts and from Willamette Writers, both a Distinguished Northwest Writer Award and a Legacy Award. Would you join me in welcoming our poet this evening, Paulann Petersen? Yes.
Oh, I think that's a signal for people to turn off their cell phones. Am I wrong? Milwaukie Poetry's 18th season. Now, it must be close to 19 years ago that Tom Hogan asked me to meet him at Grand Central Bakery in Selwood, where I lived for a long time, because he wanted to talk to me about something. And that something was his dream, the dream of Tom and a few other poets from the Milwaukie area. Their dream. The dream of a poetry reading series offered through the Ledding Library, a library that had recently purchased a nearby house, the Pond House, a place the library planned to use for community gatherings. And thanks to Tom Hogan and Greg Chamoff, thanks to the other initial Milwaukie Poetry Series committee members, thanks to the library director at that time and the library staff members, the Milwaukie Poetry Series was created. Hosanna! So here we are today in the library's lovely new community room, celebrating the 18th season of what must be, correct me if I'm wrong, but what must be the longest running poetry series in our state. 18 years, 18 seasons. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, current committee members. Thank you, Ledding Library staff members, our library angels. Earlier today, I was thinking ahead to us gathered here in the library together, safe, comfortable, while people in Florida are fleeing their homes, are running for their lives, literally. How fortunate we are, how profoundly fortunate. We're here to invite poetry into our lives, and in this battered and battering world, opening the door for poetry, welcoming poetry. Yes, welcoming poetry is a wise choice. Poetry speaks the language of us at our best. Poetry speaks the language of us at our most creative, most attentive, most responsive and compassionate. Poetry calls to the qualities in us that we need the most right now. We answer here tonight. We answer, and in that answer, we are our better selves. Tonight, I'll begin by reading a handful of poems from my latest book, My Kindred. And I will begin with the first poem in this book, which is the poem on your little broadside. Did you get one? Okay, because somebody has it. There we go. Somebody has extras. Thank you. This poem, Inhabited, as I say, which is the broadside poem this evening. And it is an invitation to the poems, all the poems in this book. It signals the very wide embrace of kinship that this book professes. A very wide embrace with creatures, both animate and inanimate, trees, birds, mammals, pollen, stone, sun, moon, stars, friends, family, all my kindred. All are my, all are our kindred, because we do all share a common ancestor. Everything, every one of us was and is made from the stuff of stars. Inhabited. A big leaf maple imprints the pronged shape, the vein tracery of its deciduous leaf children into my eyes. Two barred owls call back and forth, posing a question off to my left, its answer far to my right. A sister who echoes my aging bones, the wind-swaled fir first moans, then creaks. What to do but invite them all to come and live here inside me? I taste tannin, smell resin in each outlet breath. My inner ear rings with the tongue of raptors. This poem is entitled, Had the Matriarch Been Born a Bat? And I do think that that's a worthy train of thought, to imagine what it might be like to be born a bat. Bats, I mean, are there a more primordial looking creature? I know there maybe are others equally primordial looking, but it's hard to think of one that is more primordial looking, with their hairy tongues and those clicking sounds that they make. How they use echolocation to find their way in the darkness. In ancient times, a bat symbolically safeguarded entryways, doorways, going through from one room in a house to another, or exterior doors. It was the bat that guarded the entryways. And, of course, the fact that the females give birth while hanging upside down. Had the matriarch been born a bat, she'd grow umbrella spine fingers, long as her whole body. What she'd need to carry those almost transparent membranes of her huge furless wings. She'd give birth while dangling from her toes. A daughter, a son would clamber out of her like fonts bubbling from their source. Hanging topsy-turvy, she'd nurse those babies, her milk letting up, not down, its heavy cream rising. She'd spread her wings across each doorway's lintel, becoming the threshold keeper, staying her hairy tongue from idle click chat. She'd save its length for drinks of nectar, plunges into night's deep bloom. Ages passed before earth and sky wrenched apart from each other, before light even made its entry, while night still swaggered and held sway. Her ancestors would have been the only ones who could always find their way. Yin and yang. Now, most likely you, obviously me too, everyone, we immediately associate yin and yang with female and male. But I ask you to envision, please, that yin-yang symbol, and remember that every human being contains elements of both. We each have in us some yin, some yang. All of us contain some parts of the masculine principle, some parts of the feminine principle. So this poem is called One of Yin's Voices Speaks Up, and I ask you to remember that each of us contains part of the man in this poem, part of the woman in this poem. One of Yin's voices speaks up. You'd think water's female aspect would be a pond or a lake, deep, reflective, still, taking the sun and moon and clouds onto its thick, shimmered skin. Wrong. You would be dead wrong. Being a woman, I know at least that much about water. One high summer day, I stood behind a waterfall in a shallow cave scooped out of the cliff's base. Through the cascade, I looked out and down at the roiling pool where the waters falling came to its end. Din pummeled my ears. Mist weighted my hair. The air, smelling of skunk cabbage, willow, and mullein. The air tasted fecund and wet. deafened, mute. I gazed through that plummet, joining a world on high to the one below, and I knew. The man is rock, still, ever still, afraid to give up his hard-won place far above the rest. The woman sweeps right over his prominence. In sheer free fall, she heads down to earth, hell-bent to reach the sea. Remember now, you've got some of both of those in you. All of us do. This book, My Kindred, is full of my Whitman kin. My parents, Grace and Paul Whitman. Yes, I was born Paulann Whitman. Walt Whitman is in this book, the good gray poet. My parents are both long dead. My mother died in late November, a few days before Thanksgiving. And this poem is for her. Omen, for my mother, Grace Whitman. Omen. On what will turn out to be your early winter death day, I look out a window and see what had early in May freighted itself with purple incandescence, drenched itself in high priestess perfume, a lilac. At one branch's tip, now impossibly in blossom. Vastly early or late, it bursts into my eyes, an apparition beyond my ken. No telling how I can tell, but I know this day will unfurl another blooming, a terrible beauty so untimely I will not outlive its passing. I think I mentioned this earlier, but among my kindred are denizens of the mineral world. And as I figure it, as long as I marshal due respect, I'm allowed to speak to the mineral world. In this poem, I speak to the stones of a riverbed. Entreaty. Stones making this river's bed, I'm calling to you. Stones rolling in water's rush, do you hear me? The river carries its clamorous roil around and above you, lighting up every hue and gleam of your skin. Stones shifting under current's weight, who among you is my own? I've come to find out, to talk with the one of you who is my kin. No, not true, not entirely. Ancestor stone, you who have much to tell me, I'm here to listen to what you say. Give me the stories of our family fixations, our immigrations, long journeys made on the back of inching ice, wide diasporas accomplished by the thaw of loose-limbed soil. A child of gravel and riprap, daughter of your mineral tribe, I'm headed back into the grit of my beginnings, my bones ready to dissolve into rubble dust. Before I go, say it out loud. Tell me my own stone name. Now, a few post my kindred poems. And most of what I've written since my kindred was published seems to me to be very much a part of my kindred. How could it not be? A number of my poems are about trees. Are poems praising trees. This one attempts to convey what it might be like to be a tree, a leaf-bearing tree, the art of being deciduous. Put forth leaf psalms, sing them in your green tongue. Write them in the ink made from your pale amber blood, that elixir clear enough to belong to a green-making body. Leaf, leaf, leaf. Come autumn, each will become dross, jetsam, debris. But don't mourn these cast-offs making their departure. With your blessing, give your once green prayers leave to go on their way. Come each spring, you can let yourself surge, swell, and begin to sing your praises anew in the key of green. Shall we do it? Shall we learn how to be deciduous? In book after book, I've included bee poems, and that's with two E's. B-E-E poems. So here's a bee poem that alludes to a bit of ancient Greek history. Mycenaeans believed that bees were the link between this world and the world below. Isn't that kind of wonderful? Oh, I hope to tell you. And that belief informed how the Mycenaeans buried their most honored dead. In an age of bronze. Because a bee is the bridge between upper and under worlds, the Mycenaeans made their tombs in the shape of hives, burying their heroes and bards inside apiarian domes. Oh, to have been one of the storied mortals seen fit to lie inside a hallowed hive, someone made immortal by what people chant and sing, what they choose to tell and retell. I would eat forever that dark yet deeply sweet honey of death undone. This next poem, titled "What a Story Can Tell Us About Usefulness." This poem was inspired by the records of those ethnographers who wrote about encounters between white traders and California Indian tribes. What a story can tell us about usefulness. Having received, for the first time, payment in the form of peculiar objects, a trader called silver dollars, those native people put the coins to good use. Noting their size and shape and weight, they gave them to their children for playthings, flat, round, gleaming. The children found they could throw them like stones over the lake in such a way that they skimmed and skipped, bouncing 5, 6, even 7 times before they sank. Delight, wonder, magic. A star left a child's swung hand and summoned with each touch on the lake's glossy skin a quicksilver fountain, swift, light struck. Frequently, I write poems about my father, my mother, my dear parents. Poems about dispersing their ashes. This next poem somewhat explains my ritual of, over the years since their deaths, my ritual of scattering their ashes into the rivers and oceans of India, of Turkey, of France, of Oregon. Remains. How fine now my mother's body, how fine the body of my father, now that both have been transmuted by fire. Heat intense enough to rise in leaping flames took my father's cancer-strewn body, his whittled arms and shoulders, swollen belly, chiseled cheeks. Down to ash and bone nub, fire took his scant-fleshed self. Flame took my mother's slab of body, the one Alzheimer's left behind after it took her mind and her voice away. Fire took her already emptied self and blazed it down. How fine the ash that once was their bodies. So fine, I will never find the vessel able to contain it. Throughout the decades that I've been writing poems, yes, I am old. I've got lots of those decades. Anyway, throughout the decades I've been writing poems, I have occasionally written narrative ones, lyric narrative poems. One Small Son, this book, is actually a collection of lyric narrative poems. And I still write narrative poems once in a while. Here's one. This poem is dedicated to Ken, my husband, AKA the Poet Laureate Delivery Service. Ken, who for the 4 years that I was Oregon's Poet Laureate, drove me all over Oregon so I could give workshops and readings and keynotes to every one of Oregon's 36 counties. Well, he is the Poet Laureate Emerita Delivery Service now, and he kindly drove me here tonight. This poem is dedicated to Ken. This poem is spoken to Ken. It's a tribute. This poem is a tribute to Ken, who survived a childhood that might easily have destroyed most of us luckier ones who had good childhoods. Survival. You discover that YouTube will replay for you blow by blow the prize fights you watched as a kid. Iconic bouts aired on the Friday night fights. Most of the families I knew watched those spectacles aired on our black and white TVs. Our weekly gladiator show brought to us by Gillette Blue Blades. Even then, in my girlhood, the unleashed fury both astonished and horrified me. But you loved them, and love them now. One LaMotta fight is so memorable, you watch it 3 times in a row. Your father once hired Frankie Dillingham, a young Golden Gloves champ, to work in the men's store he managed. Customers scarce, your father away on a break, frankly would show you, the skinny Jewish 10-year-old, how to throw a punch, how to keep your guard up. You caught on fast, but not well enough for one-sided fights. Coming at you, time after time, your mother screamed, slapped, and slammed you against the kitchen wall. She hit you with one sucker punch after another. What's so memorable, I ask you, about the Sugar Ray Jake LaMotta fight you watched again last night on YouTube? You tell me LaMotta took an amazing amount of punishment, a relentless barrage of blows, and kept standing. Survival. A love of words, a fascination with their origins, a fascination with the history that a word carries in its sequence of letters and marks, its sequence of phonemes. Ever since I discovered its origin, its etymology, I've been in the thrall of the word window. Window. The Old Norse word window comes from vindr, meaning wind, and aga, meaning eye. Window, the wind's eye. The wind's eye. What a fabulous metaphor. Who was that poet, that shaman who gave an opening in a wall that name? The wind's eye. That is a marvelous metaphor. And I think of how others, a woman perhaps, might have named these openings, what kinds of names she might have given them before the name window was created. She gives them names. Before anyone even notices, wind has an eye. The woman calls the opening in one wattled wall dawn launcher and snow outlook, at times snippet of balm. That gaping hole in the peak of the roof, she calls it smoke coaxer. Or, when she feels more talkative, place where a daylight moon once bedded down for a nap. Looking up at night, she often croons under her breath its third name, the one she saves for times when everyone else lies stone asleep. Bright crown of stars hovered above my eyes. Here's another tree poem, a poem of 7 trees, actually a poem of all trees. This tree. There's the pine who remains silent amid great provocation, and the fir who murmurs and creaks when all else is still. There's the poplar who wants nothing more than everything I have, unlike the birch, who never wants anything to do with whatever belongs to me. By unfurling one by one, leaves of a certain maple can count to near 1,000. While the aspen's quaking leaves warn me not to count on it for anything. That nameless tree in my dreams, each night it journeys great distances, but always returns to the same rooted place before light can spy on its wanderings. This last tree is nothing if not every tree. This fraught world, this stricken, beleaguered world, this all too dark world, Too often I feel numb, I feel wordless in the face of this world. But the natural world, the trees, the bees, rain, the smallest of blooms, birds, the natural world reassures me, returns my voice to me. This next poem alludes to a particular bird, an egret. It alludes to how egrets and herons rest, how they sleep. They tuck their heads under one of their wings to better navigate this dark world. I go seeking among sleeping egrets. Each tucks her long beak, head, neck under one sweep of wing. Absent, yet present, burrowed into her own feathers, each closes her eyes. Battened within the blood heat her body keeps for itself, she takes replenishing sleep. The croak and swoop of her voice lie still, her song for a while at rest, unsung. Flood, wildfire, famine, disease, drought, plastic clotted seas rising. So be it that worldly mayhem too often batters me voiceless these days, nights, weeks. Kept alive in the crook of an egret's long throat, her music holds whole and strong, ever ready under that one sky-stroked wing. The last poem. This one contains sun and rain and moon and stars and trees and clouds and birds. Yeah. It's called Imprint, and its epigraph defines a very specific kind of imprint, an ecological footprint. Here's the definition. An ecological footprint measures how fast a human being consumes resources and generates waste compared to how fast nature can absorb that waste and create new resources. Imprint. May my eco-footprint shrink and shrink, yet also sink into soft soil deep enough to leave a foot-shaped impression. Let the rain, ever the rain, fill this footmark, making the imprint of me a small lake whose shore outlines the shape of my weight upon this earth. May this foot lake invite tiny ripples of light onto its surface whenever the sun appears. At night, may it also reflect the moon, while, small as its dimensions are, still finding room for a few stars. Filled, abrim, let my earthly footprint be fit to take unto itself the mirror twin of any tree branch leaning over, any cloud making its swift sky scuttle far above. At my imprint's edge, let finch, nuthatch, and wren come to drink from me. Thank you.
So thank you so much, dear Paulann. We have a question and answer period now, and Paulann has saved a poem, so we're going to end after the Q&A period with a final poem from her. And David is going to bring the microphone around. So give some thought to what question you might have for Paulann. And I'm going to start. I think a number of things I wanted to ask you, but one of them is, could you talk about your latest book and just the genesis and how My Kindred took shape?
How it took shape.
Yeah. What was the genesis of the book, and how did it take shape?
Well, I had Salmon Poetry of Ireland, Jessie Lendenny, had said that she wanted to publish another book by me, and she said spring of 2024. And this was sometime in 2022, and so I was kind of gathering poems together and looking, what might fit. I ended up looking at twice as many poems as are in the book, looking for poems that seemed to me to belong together, to be part of a whole. And then I received the notice from Jessie Lendenny that she changed her mind and she wanted the book a year earlier. She wanted it for AWP in Seattle in 2023, and that put a rush on. And so I started looking at, all these poems. And the whole sense of kindred, and that's something that's been in some of my earlier poems too. This idea that, one of my poems starts out, "So it's true, the poplar and I are sisters, daughters of an ancient star." That's a very old poem. Anyway, but I could see the poems beginning to coalesce around that. And I got some help from my dear friend Lex Runciman, who, looking at one of the first rough takes on what would go into the book, told me that the meta poems had to go. And at first I thought, meta poems are poems that are somehow about poetry, about, the writing of poetry. And I thought, and then I thought a little harder, and then I thought, okay, yeah, he's right. So I got some help with that, but the way that it came together was looking at poems, listening to them, calling them into the shape of my kindred, of a family, of a very big family, a family with lots of relatives.
Calling them into shape. So, well said. Does anyone have a question? And I want to invite the people who have logged in and are online. If there's a question you have, put it in the chat, and Josh will read it as they come through.
So, Paulann, I am a big fan of your ability to read at such a deliberate pace. And I'm wondering, when you first write a draft of a poem, do you write that draft the same way? Is it word by word, or do you write a batch and then do revising later? How does the poem come into its shape and its language?
I try to get things down on paper as quickly as possible and to be as uncensorious to myself as possible. Just get them down as fast as, and I do it by hand. I write a number of drafts longhand, pen and paper longhand before I ever keyboard them and look at them in type. And that's a whole different part of the process. You see them in type. But yeah, I try to just get it down there as fast as possible. And then when I start looking at the poem and shaping it, and then I'm always listening for sound. And if I have a place where I want a word or another word, then I try to make a little sonic map of the poem, see what's already there with sound, and then as best as I can pull the rest of the poem into that sound form. So if I have a string, let's say, of long I's or long E's that are a sort of a spinal column to the poem, and I have a choice toward the end of the poem, like say between two perfectly acceptable diction choices, and one of them has that long E, oh, you know what I'm going to take.
Well, if there are no more questions, Paulann has a final poem to end the reading.
Of course, this book is called My Kindred, and there is a poem in it called Kinship. And just a tiny bit of backstory to this. In India, in South India, there are a group of people who speak a language, an ancient language, that is completely unrelated to the other Indian languages. It's not related to any languages, nearby. And analyzing this mysterious language, scientists, linguists, discovered something astonishing about this language: kinship. A few of our world's people still speak a tongue so old, its closest analog is birdsong. Birdsong. And a bird carved some 30,000 years ago may well be our first work of art. Why mimic the palaver of a thrush? From wood or stone, why shape a tern's body, its wings pressed tight against its sides? Or remember the dream moments our beating arms took hold in air, lifting us away from earth trod smooth by our feet? Why? We each possess a bird soul. On the highest branch of every family tree, a winged spirit preens in the sun, gleaming with iridescence, that sheen of our common blood. Thank you.
Thank you so much, dear Paulann. There are Paulann's books over here on this side of the room. There's some refreshments back here on this side of the room. Please feel free to help yourself to them. Thank you for being here. Thank you all for being here. Thank you those who logged in on the live stream. We appreciate it. Let's give yourselves a hand.